Mark Watts, Derek Dolgner, ELITEFTS.com. Today we're going to go over our military press 101, just a basic overhead press progression that we like to use with athletes, and it'll just basically go through 4 different phases of a progression to reinforce some good habits. So anytime we get a large group of athletes and we want to do some overhead pressing, we will start off with a behind the neck press. Now, this is probably the only time we'll ever incorporate this. We'll always use some light weight because, again, we don't want to put the shoulders in a precarious position. So the one reason why we like to do this behind the neck first is because the bar will actually travel in a straight line. So a couple things when we do this. When we press the bar up overhead, the one thing we want to do is we want to go from a top-down progression. So the top, really what we want to do is make sure, again, we're going to basically push those hands like I'm trying to break the bar out. I'm trying to push my biceps forward. What that does is add a stability component to that top of the lift. It'd be no different than if I'm going to bench press and I'm going to tuck my elbows and I'm going to go flare at the top. Same thing with the overhead press. I'm going to go ahead, flare those elbows at the top. With the elbow forward, I have a little instability. And you can test that with your athletes by standing over them or pushing down on their fist. If I get those biceps forward, it's just going to add a little bit of stability with that. So that's the first phase of that progression. So the next one's going to be if we go in front. Now with in front, there's a couple things we have to make sure we're looking at. I want to make sure that my elbows are directly underneath these 2 fingers, right? Now you might have to adjust that depending on the athlete, but for the most part, that'll keep your athlete's forearm in a pretty good line, either straight up and down or slightly out. The other component you have to do is, again, we're going to have with our upper back, trying to keep our upper back tight, one thing we'll have to do is get our athletes to push their elbows forward. Now, for some athletes, with females or athletes of a lighter structure, they'll be able to get those elbows real far forward and still have their hands on their collarbone, their hands attached to the bar and on their collarbone. The thing is with that, the one thing to help with that is make sure, again, push the elbows forward, but make sure, again, they're pushing the elbows forward and down. And that way they won't have that overextension and almost like a Olympic, split jerk or push press. The one thing about this movement is that, again, Derek's face is in the way when he presses. So it's almost like a good cue to use is you're going to open the window and look through. So you're still finishing at the same point. It should be right above the skull, right above that top point, right above the spine. So again, elbows forward. Again, I'll have a slight lean back if I'm doing a strict press. As I press the weight up, and I'll end up finishing with a slight lean forward. So that's one thing to look at. Make sure the elbows are forward, and then make sure, again, you're in a straight line, straight up and down. Again, those forearms should be pointed where you want the force to go. Third thing is going to be just a basic back to behind the head, and we will do a push press with this. With the push press with this, here's how we initiate it first. And again, same reason we want to start behind the head because the bar goes in a straight line. One less thing to think about. Slight bend in the knees, so we'll have a little soft knees. We'll have our feet about hip width, and again, we want to initiate the movement with a dip. So we would call it dip, drive, and stabilize. That's just kind of a ditty that we use. With the dip, we want to make sure, lift the toes within the shoes. So point your toes straight up in the air, almost like you're trying to push them through the top of your shoes. That'll ensure that your weight is distributed on your heels. So now when I dip down, instead of dipping down with my knees forward, I'm going to dip down, pushing those hips slightly back, all right? And it'll change for Olympic lifts and whatnot, but just for a basic progression, that's really what we want to do. Point those toes up, dip, drive, and stabilize. So again, for behind the neck, again, using those hips to initiate that movement. That bar doesn't come off the shoulders until those hips are extended. And we're staying flat-footed just for this push press progression. The next one's going to be, now we'll go to the front, and this will be our push press. Same setup as a military press now, and again, we're just going to do the same thing. Again, Derek's flexibility is going to be a little bit different than some of your athletes, but again, same initial movement, lift the toes, dip, drive, stabilize. Same thing. Open the window, look through, finish at the top. Drive those elbows forward and down to start with. Drive those elbows out at the top, right? And again, for a push jerk or a split jerk, it might change, but that's a pretty good progression to use if you have a large group of athletes trying to keep them safe and incorporate an overhead press into your program. So again, feel free to comment in the exercise index if you have any ideas or any other questions. And again, join us next time.